Begin the current Daf Mesechtas Gitin Daf Pei Hey. We begin 15 lines down to the top of the Amud. We're continuing the halacha of the next Mishnah, continuing on the theme of the previous Mishnah, which was Chutz Miploni. We had said that in the previous Mishnah, you're permitted to everyone except Ella Leploni. So our Mishnah continues regarding with Ella, with the exception of certain individuals that they're not part of that Gerushin. Shir corresponds with Kalzach and Chezka. Turn to the Daf. We're today's Daf. So, discussing today's daf are the Mishnah that's going to discuss the case of Hareyat Muteres L'Chaladim. You're permitted to every single person. Meaning, like the Mishnah says, Allah of Kedushin. For anyone that anyways there's no Kedushin. So what do you mean you're permitted to everyone but them? Anyways, she's forbidden for them. So that's going to be kosher in contrast to the previous Mishnah, which we had this machlekes regarding if you're leaving someone out. Our Mishnah says that these are not considered leaving him out because anyways you're forbidden to these individuals. Now, Allah of Kedushin, but then someone that she does have Kedushin, even if it would be a sin, that there are certain types of cases that Kedushin is taifis, Kedushin takes effect even though it's forbidden, then possible, then that would be invalid because then you wouldn't be doing a full gerushin. Then the Gemara has a great long discussion regarding 9 questions regarding shiur beget. What's considered, did you leave over in the get, which is exactly the contrast of our previous mission and this mission regarding, is that considered leaving over, or anyways it's forbidden? What would these halacha, what would these cases be regarding if it's considered leaving something over or not? The next mission to discuss is the machlekes regarding gufish or get. What's the primary text of a get? And the Gemara in its discussion comes to Yadayim She'in Mechichas regarding when you have a handle that's not indicative, it's not necessarily approving the idea, but it would be seem to indicate. Would that be considered enough of a text? And the correct terminology and spelling of the text of a get, the actual technical parts of the get, is on the end of the Amud. So we begin the current Daf Pei Hey, 15 lines down at the top of the Amud. We would continue to look at the next Mishnah, like we said, that continues in contrast in regards to the previous Mishnah, that if you divorce your wife, almana, that Ella, you're permitted to have with Ella Leplani except for a certain person, not. So this Mishnah says the following case. So the husband tells his wife, you're permitted to every single person, Ella, but for except la'aba, my father, lavicha, your father, la'achi, my brother, lachicha, your brother, la'eved, to a slave, la'eved to a non-Jew, as the Mishnah really says, ulachol mi she'ein Allah of kedushin, and for anyone that anyways she wouldn't be able to have any marriage to. And he's saying that you're permitted to everyone, but for these individuals, says the Mishnah, kosher, because like Rashi explains, it's not a shiur, it's not leaving over, it's not lacking in the creases, because even without the issur of the marriage that she had, anyways there wouldn't be any kedushin with her father, his father, an eved, kedushin doesn't take effect. So you're permitted to everyone except for these individuals. Like you can't marry a tree. Like what does that mean? That you can't marry the eved. Anyways, you can't marry them. So it's not a shiur. It's not leaving over in the divorce of this marriage. So it's a kosher get. Now let's say, however, he says you're permitted to everyone. Ella, but not if alman l'kohen gadol, meaning she's a widow, and he's telling her that you're permitted to everyone but for a kohen gadol. Now, since kedushin is teifis b'chiv alavin, as the Gemara says in the first part of kedushin of Yitchesem Abeis. Now, here when he's telling her you're permitted to everyone but for, let's say, alman l'kohen gadol, the reason why kedushin is not going to be teifis is because of the issur of the marriage that he's leaving over, which that's a shiur in the get. So if she was an almana, which anyway she's a grusha really anyway, but she won't be a grusha because he's divorcing her except for the kohen gadol, that for him you're not divorced, so that shall be forbidden to him will be leaving over in the get, because this that she was forbidden to the kohen gadol anyway as almana, well, that kedushin would be taifis, so that would be a shiur in the get. That would make it possible. Or let's say grusha v'chalutza kohen hedjed, a divorcee or a chalutza to a kohen hedjed, where she's saying you're except for that guy, again, that although anyways there's an issur, but that issur kedusha would be taifis, or mamzeres and nesina liyisrael, an illegitimate woman, or from the gevainim, this woman to a regular Yisrael, or bas Yisrael lamamzul anasin, ulachol mishesh lo b'kedushin, any situation where that if she'd be single, kedushin would take effect. Then afil b'avera, even though there's a prohibition, a negative prohibition to have this marriage, but you're leaving that out to say that person you cannot go ahead and get married to. Puzzle that would invalidate the get, because again, that would be considered as shiur, as leaving over something in the get of permitting her to the people that a woman that's generally divorced would be permitted to, again, albeit in sin, but kedusha would take effect. Now, says the Gemara, you said a klal dereisha. Klal dereisha meaning you opened up by saying, when you were talking about if he says to her, you're permitted to everyone but for father and your father and all these things, and he said, ulachol misha ein lo love kedushin, anyone that does no kedushin, that's a kalal. That's saying you're including something. So what's that coming to include? That's lasuya. That's coming to include shar chiyav krisis, other liabilities of karas, which is other types of cases that one would be chayav karas. Klal of the seifa, when you said at the seifa, another time a general terminology, because you ended off by saying that the chomi sheyesh love kedushin, that you said that then the get is going to be puzzle. So what's that klal coming to include? Lasu yishar chiyav, and that's coming to include other negative prohibition. Now my avi nesini, which from the Gevainim, from the Shiba Umais that were in Canaan, which is a negative prohibition related to Schatenbam, not to get married to them. Mitzri, Vadoimi, which within 3 generations where there's an Isra say. So those are what we're saying, that if you left out those individuals, that the get would be possible, because that is considered shiur again, because Kedushin is typhus on those cases. Now the Gemara starts a series of 9 questions regarding the theme of our Mishnah, of regarding what's considered shiur and leaving over it in the Gerishin and what's not, with these questions. Says the Gemara, Rav asked Rav Nachman, question number 1. What happens if the husband says, you are permitted to everyone, chutz mikedushay katan, except for the kedushin of a minor, of a boy, of a young boy? Ma, what's the halacha? So he says, except for that person who's a katan. What's the question? As the Gemara explains. Do we say, hashta mi Allah bar havayuhu? But right now, this child can't get married because he's a young boy. You have to be an adult to create a marriage. So that's not considered shiur, not leaving over anything. Anyways, he's currently not eligible for marriage. He ultimately will eventually be eligible, and therefore it's like you're leaving someone out, and therefore that get would not be effective. So Rav Nachman said to him, Tinisu, we learned this in the Brisa. It says, Kitano miskareshes. A young girl could be divorced if she received her get after her father passed away. In other words, even if her father had gotten her married to this man, which is a full-fledged biblical marriage, this young girl could receive the divorce from her husband. Says Rav Nachman Amai, why is this halacha true? We need to have that we compare the marriage to the divorce. That she should not be able to get divorced only if she could get herself married to another man. So, but she can't get herself married to another man because she's a minor. Only her father could do it when he's alive. So Ella rather proves Rav Nachman his point. Because ultimately she will one day be eligible at a later point in time for marriage. And we're considering that from now, because the pasuk wasn't precise to say that she should be right now able to have marriage, as long as she's in the klal of Havaya. So then it's v'yatzav ha'islesh acher. You see, we compare divorce to marriage. So yes, so she could get divorced, and therefore, because she could get married, even though right now she can't get married, but she's in the category, so she could receive her get, which her father had married her off. Says Rav Nachman, so hachanam hirosa asil chalavaya. Regarding shiura, if you're leaving over that this woman that you're divorcing cannot get married to this 7-year-old boy, it is a shiur, because you see that is considered in the klal of Havaya, even though right now technically you cannot have Havaya. So therefore that should invalidate the get. That was case number 1. Case number 2. Let's say he says, Chutz bin hanaylodim. Let's say he says you're permitted to anyone except for those who are destined to be born. Ma, what's the halacha? So what's the question? The Gemara explains. Now this child was never even born yet, so that's not considered leaving out anybody. There maybe know that they will end up being born, and he's making her forbidden on them and she'll be forbidden on them because of the marital relationship she has with her ex, and therefore that's a shiur, that's leaving over something in the gerushin. So Rav Nachman responded, he said, Tinisua. I could answer it from the halach of our Mishnah. Our Mishnah said that one of the cases that we said from the Reisha, that if he says you're permitted to everyone except for that it's going to be kosher, is la'eved u'lo'ev de gechavim, for a slave or for a non-Jew. Says the Gemara, im isa, if it would be true that it would be possible in the case of noiladim, so then eved v'eved gechavim nami. Then the slave and the non-Jew also, you could say by them, avedi de megayri. They could also convert. And even so, the Mishnah tells us it's not leaving over anything. Obviously, somebody that's not here yet is not considered that it's a shiur in the get. Because if you're going to consider a baby that's going to be born as leaving over something, then the Eved should also be considered as the same potential of being born again by Gerus. And we see that's not considered as a shiur. Says the Gemara, no, it's not a proof. Why? Because Hanach Lavli Gure Kaimi. Non-Jews and slaves are not destined to be converted. Whereas Hani Lisli Yudli Kaimi, babies are going to be born. That's a fact. Statistically speaking, since creation of time, that babies are going to be born. But a slave and not necessarily the case. And therefore, it's not a raya from this halacha of our Mishnah. So now the Gemara goes on to the next case number 3. What happens if the husband says, you're permitted to everyone, chutz mi bal achaisa, except for his brother-in-law, meaning her sister's husband. You can marry everyone, but not your sister's husband. Ma was halacha. So what's the case? Meaning, what's the question? The Gemara says, do you say that, okay, right now, anyway, she's not fit to marry him, because as long as her sister's alive, that you're not allowed to marry sisters. So it's not considered as a shiur. Maybe knows. At times, her sister could pass away, and therefore then she's fit for him. So therefore that would be considered as a shiur. So Malay said to him, Tinisua. He said, we learned this in the halacha of our Mishnah. Why? Because the Mishnah said, that two of the cases that are considered not a shiur, you're not leaving anything over, because anyways they're forbidden tar. Because kedushin is not typhus. Is for a slave of a non-Jew. Wait a second. Those cases too, Avid and Megairi, that they also could convert, meaning that this is different than what the Gemara had said before by the babies. By the babies, definitely will happen. Not definitely they're going to be Megairi. But here also, it's not definitely the sister is going to die. So therefore, it's equivalent to this case of Eved Gechavim, that obviously that they also could convert. And still we see that we're not concerned for maybe they're going to convert. So we also shouldn't be concerned that maybe this is going to die. So that should not be considered as a shiur, not leaving anything over. So you want to know it's not a raya. Because geres lo shchicha, conversion is not common. So that's why the Mishnah said that if you say you're permitted to everyone except for the Eved Gechavim, it's not leaving anything over. But misa shchicha, death, talking about death just before, death is common. It's a treftzach, right? So therefore, for the brother-in-law to be as forbidden, that might be a shiur, and therefore it would be possible because that's something that's more shriach. So it could be, it wouldn't be a right from our Mishnah. It could be actually that case would be considered as a shiur. Case number 4. What happens if he says you're permitted to everyone, chutz miznusayich mahu, but you're not permitted to commit to have a maises nus, to have a out of wedlock relationship. So what's the question? So the Gemara says, on the one hand, b'nisun haloi shayur. Regarding marriage, he didn't leave anything over. You're allowed to marry whoever you want to. So maybe that would be a full-fledged gerushin, like the maybe shayur b'biyah. But he left over something regarding intimacy, and that's an element of marriage. So maybe that is considered as a shiur, because he says you can't be mazana. So Amalei said to him, Tinisu, we learned this in our Mishnah. Why? Because 2 of the cases that we mentioned, again, that are kosher from the Reisha, that anyway she's forbidden to these people, so if he's leaving out those people, it's not considered as a shiur, was la'ab lavicha. To my father and to your father, that the get's still going to be kosher. Now, says the Gemara, ubemai. What's the case talking about? If he was telling her that you're forbidden to marry my father and your father, what do you mean? Abba v'vicha b'nei nesu'inu? Could you even get married to a father or a father-in-law to entertain, to think, to say that that you would have to fulfill the condition, but condition is not even typhus. You can't even say that was even the condition that was being excluded. Elav, obviously, he's saying that, you're being divorced and you're permitted everyone except that you don't have biznus with my father or your father. Okay, so wait a second. That sounds like okay. So what's not considered as shiur of being left over in the gerushin if he's forbidding her to have biznus with his father or her father, which anyways she's forbidden to them. But it sounds like acher. But let's say he's forbidding biznus with another person, shiur, that would be leaving over. That answers our question of chutz miznusayach. You see that leaving out the ability to be mizan with a certain person is considered leaving out. From the fact that only by father and father-in-law is not considered leaving out, but everyone else would be. Says, no, it's not a proof. Because Dilma, maybe the truth is binisuin. The Mishnah, when they were saying to the wife, except for my father, your father, was regarding that you're not allowed to marry them. Now, even though that's not normal, but maybe the other insiv, maybe that we're talking about where if they would violate and get married. So therefore, for someone else, that would be shiur. But regarding his nus, I would tell you maybe it would not be a shiur. It's not a raya. Maybe it was talking about that you're not allowed to get married, even though there's not typhus. Okay, but that's what he's saying. You're going to violate and you're going to go into the chapel and you can get married anyway. Obviously in halacha we don't recognize it, but that's what you're coming to say, except for that. And therefore, so therefore by them it's not a shiur, because anyways you're forbidden. Another person would be, but that's only for marriage. But maybe if it's nus, maybe it would not consider as a shiur. Now, the Gemara goes on to the next case. What happens if he says you permit it to everyone? What's Allah except for irregular relations? To do it in the unnatural way. So what happens if he says only that is forbidden? So what's the question? As the Gemara explains. On the one hand, in the vaginal way, he's not leaving over anything. And therefore, you'd say that it's a full-fledged gerushin. Maybe no mishkebe ishiksiv. The pasuk talks about when they commit adultery. Actually, when it talks about homosexuality, it talks about if a man is going to lay with a male, mishkeve isha, the way he lays carnally with a woman. Now that says in the plural. What's mishkeve? So we see the pasuk is equating anal and vaginal relations, that they're both included in the plural of mishkeve isha. So then you could say that, okay, so that is considered part of marriage that he's leaving out, and therefore again it would be considered as a shiur. So that's another question. Question number 6: what happens if he says, "What's halacha if he says, hey, you're permitted to everyone, you get married to whoever you want to, except for the ability for them to nullify your vow." So what's the question? So the Gemara explains. On the one hand, benisun halei shiur, regarding marriage, he didn't leave over anything. She can marry whoever she wants to, and therefore it would be a kosher get. Like Dima, maybe no. The pasuk tells us, "Isha yikamena v'isha yifredenik." The pasuk says her husband could validate or nullify her vows. Now, since he's leaving out the ability of the nullifying of the vows by himself, so we still call her to him Isha, her husband, and therefore it's not a full-fledged gerushin. So that's another question. Question number 7 is chutz mitra masayich mahu. What's the halacha if, let's say, she's going to get married to a kohen? He says you can get married to a kohen, but he cannot feed you truma. So what's the question? So the Gemara explains. On the one hand, regarding marriage, he didn't leave over there. She can marry whoever she wants to. Maybe kinyi kaspai. The pasuk says kinyi kaspai hu yochel by. Whoever the kohen acquires could eat truma. So ksiv, that's what the pasuk says. And here, since he's not allowing her to eat the truma from her new husband, the kohen, so then you're saying essentially she's not kinyi kaspai. So it comes out that there's lacking over here in the remnants of the kedushin by the kahanim, because you're still holding on to something. So that's leaving on the somewhat of the kinyan of the ishus you have with her, and therefore maybe that would be considered as a shiur beget. Kohen can't marry a gerusha. This woman, is saying if she's a gerusha? Well, if she marries in sin.
Why can't Rashi say Skana?
Right, Taisa discusses that. The gerusha mischalel is babi is kohen. Right, Taisa discusses that exactly what's the case. Chutz mitrumashu kohen. Right, Right. Taisa addresses that question. Taisa says that question. How could you marry a Kohen? Anyway, she's going to become Chalala because she's a Grusha. Grusha's going to marry a Kohen. Right. Right. Taisa says something similar. Chutz mitruma, that he's a Kohen and he's divorcing her for everything except that she should not become forbidden in his truma. The ex wants to still give her truma. Taisa says a different pshat. Says that he doesn't like it because of your question. That similar that Grusha is forbidden in the Kohen, she becomes a Chalala. Anyway, she can be forbidden in the truma. So he says no. The one who's divorcing her is a Kohen. He says I'm divorcing. You can marry everyone, but chitz mitrim, I want to continue giving you trim because I'm a Kohen. No, for that I'm holding on to that. For that part of the marriage, I'm holding on to that. I'm divorcing you, except that I want to hold on to the ability to still give you that you're my husband, you're my wife. No, that's the question. The question is the fact that you're allowed to marry whoever you want to. Would that be a shiur, or would that not be shiur, or would you say that no, that would be shiur because kinyikas b'yom rachmana, and through the kedushin is how she's eating truma, so therefore there's still kedushin. Therefore it's not going to be a creases. That's exactly the question according to Taisus. So the next question, says the Gemara, is chutz miyirish shesayich mahu. What's the halacha of, let's say, he says, if you die, I'm going to inherit you. Meaning he's divorcing her, but I want the Yirisha because you have all those assets. So what's the question? Again, he's not leaving over anything regarding the marriage. She can marry whoever she wants to. Maybe because the pasuk says l'she'eroi v'yoresh oisek siv. Pasuk talks about when it mentions that if someone doesn't have brothers to his father, so he gives the inheritance l'she'eroi hakara be'lav mimishpachta, to the relative that's closest from the family, and v'yoresh oisek. It's an interesting pasuk how to translate. But the Gemara in Baba Basra of Kafir Alf explains that she'eroi hakare beloved, the relative is close to him, zu ishtoi, and it says v'yoresh, so he's going to inherit her. Which from here we learn out the husband inherits his wife. Now, since he's inheriting her, so essentially she's ishtoi, she's his wife, and therefore you would say that that's going to be considered as a shiura. So that's the question. On the one hand, he's not leaving over anything for the marriage. On the other hand, he's inheriting her, and therefore that's a shiur because that's she'eroi, that's considering her somewhat of a wife. Question number 9 is, let's say he tells her you're permitted to everyone chutz mikedushayich b'shtar, except of getting married with a document. Meaning, if your new husband's going to marry you with a document, it's not going to be a kedushin. In other words, he leaves out one of the 3 ways of kedushin. Doesn't leave out all. You get married with kesev, you get engaged with bia, just now with a shtar. Now, what's the halacha? So the Gemara says, do we say, okay, if she's mekadosh because of bia, so the new husband could get engaged to her with money or with bia, and therefore he's not leaving over anything. No, it says in the pasuk that she'll go out and she'll get married with iskish havayis ladadi. In the one word of bahaisa, the pasuk mentions all the ways of getting engaged, and that's compared to the divorce. And therefore, when you leave over one of the ways of getting engaged, then you don't call it v'yatza. So the Gemara take or let it stand. All these questions remain unresolved. Besides for the first one, that are these considered as shiurim? Are they considered as leaving out from the gerushin, and therefore would be possible, or would it not be, and therefore it would be a valid get? So now look at the next Mishnah. Now we move on to the gufay shel get, to the primary text of the get, which the ikr writing of the get should be written with these following words, which are the words Hardeat muteres l'chal adam. You are permitted to every single person. You're permitted to marry anyone. That's the opinion of the Tanna Kamma. He says that the following words: V'den diyahavi lichi minoi, and this scroll that you're going to get from me is a sefer tiruchim, is a scroll of divorce. V'geresh shavukin, it's a letter of abandonment. V'get peturin, and it's a document of release. Lemahach lehisna'asava, so this that you could get married. V'chol gever disyatzvan, to any man that you want. Now, the reason why he requires these words is because you have to prove from the text, from the document itself, that it's through this scroll that he's divorcing her. Meaning, According to Tanakam, you're just saying Haret Materes. We don't know how are you permitting her to every single person. Yehuda says it has to be indicative from the document itself that this document is divorcing you. So therefore he says these words, then this should be for you, this get should go ahead and divorce you, and therefore it has to say those words too. That's regarding a get of a isha. Now gufish get shichur, the text of a document of emancipation of a slave is hareat bas chayrin, behold you are a free woman, or hareat la'atzmech, you are for yourself. That's by a get shichur. Now says the Gemara like this: Pshita, it's obvious if amalala ishtai, if he tells his wife, that meaning he has it written in a get, and he writes the words hareat bas chayrin, behold you are a free woman, and he doesn't write hareat materes l'chol adam, you're permitted to every single person. He hasn't said anything because it's not applicable by divorce, a terminology of liberty, of freedom, because she's free beforehand too. A married woman is a free woman. So it wouldn't be appropriate, the wording, and it wouldn't do any gerushin if he wrote Hareat Bas Chayrin. So to, let's say, the other way around. Let's say Amala l'Shevchasa. Let's say he says to his maidservant, Hareat Materes l'chol adam, you're permitted to every single person. He hasn't said anything because it's not applicable, because regarding work, that means she's not being removed from him, because he just said you're permitted to marry anyone. Now, since she is a shivcha, and she has the name of a shivcha, then she actually is not permitted to anyone. So what are you saying, Hareat Materes l'chol adam? That wouldn't create any shichur. But one question that we do have is, Amalala Isha, if he says to the woman, one of the words we said for the get shichur, he says, Hareat la'atzmech, you are for yourself. Ma, what's the halacha? Here we really could ask a question. Because, yeah, we said one way of shichur for Isha wouldn't work, and one way for Isha for shichur wouldn't work. But this one from shichur, by a shivcha, maybe this would work by Isha. Why? Because when he says you're for yourself, legamri kamala, totally, bistalain ve'ashtain now. You're for yourself now, and go ahead. That means to say you're divorced. Or maybe it's like when we say by the shivcha means for work. You work for yourself, but maybe it's not a terminology of divorce. So Rashi says Tashma, we could bring a riot down. If you learn in the Mishnah, it says the text of a document of emancipation is Hareat Bas Chayrin, behold you are a free woman, and Hareat La'atzmech, behold you are for yourself. So Umma Avda, if a slave, the Kani Legufe, the master owns the body, the physical body of the slave. Yet Kiyama leHareat La'atzmech, when he says you are for yourself, Kani Gufe acquires his own body. So Isha like Kani Gufa, a woman that the husband does not own her body, like Koshkin isn't all the more so that she will be divorced with the terminology of Hareat La'atzmech when you are for yourself. That would be a valid terminology of Gerishin for a woman. Now, another question the Gemara says, Omli Ravina Ravashi says, same Ravina asking Ravashi, says, Amalela Avdoi. Let's say he says to his slave, Ainli Eisikbach, Chabgonesh Tzitim Medeh. I have no business with you. Ma, what's the halacha? Would that be valid as a get shecher? So Amli Rav Chanan Ravashi, some say it was Rav Chanan Mechazeno Ravashi. It's Toshma, it's being right, the time learning the Brisa. The Brisa says, someone sells a slave to a non-Jew. The halacha is that Yotz Lacheres, the slave goes free. Meaning, as Rashi points out, even though the Gemara told us in the Memdal Med Aleph that we penalize the seller, the Jew, to redeem his slave that he sold to the non-Jew up until 10 times the value of his slave, still, even when he redeems him back from the non-Jew, he's not allowed to enslave him anymore. And B'tzarch get shichur, and he needs to have a document of emancipation to permit himself with a Jewish woman, from his first master, this Jew. Now, Amr Shemigam Lili says, but when we say this, it's like only if he had not written on the slave a document when he sold the slave to the non-Jew. But if he wrote on him a document to the slave when he sold him to the non-Jew, that itself will be his emancipation. You don't have to write a new get shecher now. Says the Gemara, my oinoi. What does it mean that the master wrote to the slave when he sold him an oinoi? So Rav Sheshes is the chasavli that he wrote to the slave like this: when you will flee and run away from the non-Jewish owner, if you could save yourself from the non-Jew, I have nothing to do with you. Oh, so obviously we see that saying the terminology, but Einli Eisikbach is a terminology of emancipation, and therefore, if that was written to get shichur, that would also be valid.
Didn't say for a ticket item that here goes it that if If it runs away from a captive that is not free, king came in to the soul, always run away.
From his own master,
No.
from a non-Jewish master.
Yeah.
If he ran away, then what would
He
be?
goes free.
Then he goes free.
But I think the Rabbanim keep an eye on said that we wouldn't hold by this because they'll make themselves be captive and run away.
Right. I'm trying to recall exactly what the case is because we'll have to look at that. But if he wrote Oinai when he sold, well, this is not a captive because he sold him to the non-Jew. He sold him to the non-Jew, so we penalize the master that has to redeem him. But when he sells him, he has to ultimately. Right. But he did, and he sold the slave. So when he redeems him back, even up to till 10 times the amount, he has to write a get shiur. Shimon Lazar says if he wrote him oinoi when he sold him in the beginning, that's enough of a get shiur. What did he write in the oinoi? He says if you end up running away, I have nothing to do with you. So you see, he says the Gemara. That's what the Gemara was trying to answer. You see, the words "Ein le'esek is a terminology of shiur. Now the Mishnah had said, Rabbi Yehuda he says, "V'dein de'hava lechim enoy," and this that you're getting from me is sefer teruchen, is a document of divorce, v'geresh shavukin, it's a letter of abandonment. So the Gemara says, "What? If what? Yeah. Yeah. So he becomes like Israel. So now the Gemara wants to know, what is this machlekes between the Tanna Kama and Rabbi Yehuda? If it's enough just to say Aret Materes Chaladim, or you have to say this whole Megillah that Rabbi Yehuda says. So the Gemara says because Rabban hold Yadayim she'ein machiches. When you have a handle that's not indicative, so a handle is like something that you hold on to something with. And to say that this proves that through this sefer is what he's divorcing her. So if it's not proving it, still having yadayim, it's still a handle. So v'avagav loy kasav l'badain, even though he didn't write in it like reviewed this whole text, and this should be for you the sefer, doesn't that make a difference? Mucha milsa is still obvious. It's with this get that he's divorcing her. In other words, we say, from the fact that he wrote a get and he's giving it to her, he's obviously revealing intention that it's with this get that he wants to divorce her. Now, it's not meichiches. It's not conclusively indicative that it's with this get, but it's yadayim. It's a handle. And the guy is on Instagram. He has a handle that you can tell what type of guy he is already showing. It's not indicative. We can foretell what type of guy he is already. So that itself would be enough. Somebody else, no, yadayim shein mechiches lam yadayim. If you have a handle that's not indicative, even though you could assume, but that wouldn't be considered a handle. And therefore, the time of the custom of the because he writes, and this, the mucha milsa, the bahai gitik magarshla, it's obvious that then it's with this kid he's divorcing up. But then if he didn't write and this, Amri, then we say, maybe the Buddha's garsha, maybe he's divorcing her with words, that what he tells her when he hands it over, he says, maybe that's what he's divorcing her with, which obviously would not work. Maybe he thinks that the document is just a proof that she should have it as testimony wherever she goes to show that she's single. But maybe he's not really divorcing her with the get. Well, that obviously wouldn't work. So therefore, you need that it should say explicitly inside that this is how he's divorcing her. That's what the machlekes is in our Mishnah. Now the Gemara gets very technical regarding the actual text of the get itself. Says the Gemara, Omar Abaye says, Haiman the cause of Gita. If someone's writing a get, Leilichte v'dein, the mashma v'din. He shouldn't write the word v'dein with a yud. Because that sounds like, if you were reading the words, it sounds like v'din di'hava l'chim mino yiseifer teruchen, that the halacha says that I should divorce you. But if halacha did not require me that I should divorce you, then I wouldn't divorce you. Ela v'dein, write it without a yud, so that you could only read it as, and this, not in the halacha. So take out the yud. That's one thing. Number two, for the lichtav igeres, don't write the word igeres shavukin, a letter of abandonment, with a yud. Why? Because the mashma igras, that's the word of a roof, like marafsin igra, right? They say it's bursting the roof. The igra is the terminology of a roof. So if you're going to write, it's a roof of abandonment, what are you even talking about over here? So Lazarup, leave out the yud that it's Eli Igeris. Then it's obvious that it's talking about a letter and not a roof. Moreover, v'leichtav limahach, don't write limahach with a yud. The words of limahach, lisnasava, lochoman disis yatzven, which are the words that this should be for you, that you can marry whichever person you want to marry. Because if you wrote a yud over there, the mashma li mehach, it sounds like, to me, from this sefer, you'll be a guy, whoever you want, however you read it, but rather don't write it with a yud, write it without a yud. So then it's obvious it's lemahach and not li mehach to me from this. Moreover, v'leichtav limchach, meaning, what does that mean? Why would I write limchach if the word is limchach? It just means, like Rashi explains, make sure to separate the leg of the hay from the roof of the hay. There should be a gap between the leg and the roof, that it shouldn't look like a ches. Because if it's limachach, the mashma kichucha, then it sounds like a joke. In other words, yeah, I'm just fooling around with you. I'm joking around like that you can marry whoever you want, but it's one big joke. Which, as Rashi quotes, the text of the get is pateres yaseichi leichi, I'm releasing you, ant you pleinis bas pleini, this woman, the daughter of this man. The obvious in Tasi Mikadmas to know that she was my wife from up until now. V'kadu patoches v'shavokis v'zaruches yasich, and now I'm going to release her and let her go and divorce her. Yitahavin Rasha, that she should be permitted b'shaltob and nefshazaychi, and that you could do whatever you want. Lemahach, to have this opportunity, this is about that you can marry whoever you want to. And no man will protest against you from this day on onward. But then and this that you have for me, get pituchen, that's a document of divorce, and the sefer teruchen, a scroll of release, of igeres shvukin, and a letter of abandonment. Kedas Moshe Yisrael, like the law of Moshe and Yisrael. That's Rashi brings down this whole text of what the words of the get are. Now, further of the proofreading and the making sure the editing of the get is good. So the words the sehevion and the sitzvatzion should be tlasa yudin. Should have actually 3 consecutive yudin together. Then you should read it the sehevion, because if you only put in 2 yuds, that would be read that di dahavion that would mean in general regarding women. It would be plural on the women, but it wouldn't necessarily be for you. So too, when it says di sitzvayon, when you write 3 yuds, it sounds like that you should be permitted to marry if you want to. But if you only wrote 2 yuds, but the mashma, if you write 3 yuds, says the Gemara, that sounds like tevyon, sitzvayon, that you will be or you want, but it has to have 3 yuds. Moreover, v'lorche lavav de tiruchen, v'lavav de shivukin. Make sure that the vav, when it says sefer tiruchen, and the vav when it says igeres shivukin, are long. Because if you don't make it long, it might look like a yud. The mashma, that would sound like terichen, meaning that would just mean, in general, a chasing away, and v'shvikin, and leaving, which that would be a letter of women that are just forlorn, and it wouldn't necessarily be hers. So it has to be tiruchin and shivukin, which is referring to her, versus trichin shvikin, would just mean in general. So to balorche levav de kadu, you should make sure that the vav of vikadu, the last vav over there, make sure that that's, which means the word now, should be long, which is kadu pataras yasechi, now I'm releasing you. The last vav, make sure it's long, that it shouldn't look like a yud. Because if you don't make it long, the mashma ukadi, which sounds like with nothing, without any sefer, like the word we say throughout Shas, kedinis, but like for nothing, it was taken along. So that would be problematic. So you have to make sure that it's long, so it's the word kadu. Moreover, don't write that now that she could choose who she wants to get married to with an aleph, because the mashma lo yisnasva. If you wrote le'isnasava and you had a little gap, that would sound like Loi isnasava, that she cannot get married. No, make sure rather it with a hey. Lehisnasava, because if you distance the loi from yisnasava, like I said, it's going to sound like you're not going to get married. Now the Gemara has the following question, which relates to the machlekes we had in the Mishnah. Ibailuhu, be'inan v'dain, or loi be'inan v'dain. In other words, essentially the Gemara is asking, like Rashi explains, is halacha like Rabbi Yehuda or like the Rabbanan? Is it enough just to write Harei Matez Cha'adam, or do you have to write this whole text, v'dain lehavi lechi minoi, etc., etc.? The Gemara Tashma is being a raya because the Iskin Rava Begiti Rava instituted regarding the Gitin that the following words: Ich Pelanya bar Pelanya, how this person, this man, the son of this man, Pater v'Sarachis Planisa in Tase, that he released and he let go of this woman, his wife, Tahavis in Tase Midkadam Dano, that was his wife from up until now, Miyom Dinan Ul from this day on forward. Now, Ilu V'Dain Lo Kamar, but it didn't tell them anything about writing V'Dain. So you don't have to write this text of Rabbi Yehuda. It says according to your reasoning, Kulu Mikamar. You think he said all the other things that are written again, like the Tahavian, etc. You think Rava mentioned them in this Takana? Ella, rather, even though Rava doesn't mention them, Be'ina, you do need to write them. It's just that he didn't mention them all. So also regarding B'dain, Be'ina, it could be that you do need it. It's just that Rava didn't have to be Masakin, only these things, as the Gemara continues to explain, why did he specifically mention these things? Because the word Meyema Dinan, the reason why he mentioned this, yes, there are other things mentioned that he just didn't discuss. But the word Meyema Dinan, why did he say from this day forward? Obviously, it's from this day forward. No, it's Lafukim de Rabbi Yesi. Because the Amar, Rabbi Yesi says that you don't have to write Mehayoim by a get of a Shchiv Mera. Why not? Because he holds Manish Shtar Mechichalav. The date of the document proves that it's from today, because why are you writing a date? And therefore, it's not like a get lachamisa. So Rava was masakin by old Gitin that the scribe should be accustomed to now. Although, as Rashi says, we know that halacha is a Rabbi Yesi, but still we want to remove ourselves from machlekes and that it should be totally permitted. We don't want to have any shame psul on any mishpach and klai. So the truth is, it actually would be kosher even without the mehayoim. But we don't want to get involved in machlekes. So that's why Rava instituted miyam dinan. And the words ula olam. Why do you say and forever? So that's as continue to pay vav and aleph. That comes to exclude what we mentioned of Pegimel and Beis. Rava asked Rav Nachman, the Omar, let's say a husband says, Ishti. Today you're not my wife. Tomorrow you are my wife. What's the halacha? And he answered me, says, Given the paska. You're right. Once she stopped being your wife, she can't come back being your wife the next day. Oh, that's what Rava even so was masakin not to do like that. Because again, we don't want to make a laws on the get to say, oh, wait a second, maybe she's not divorced, maybe because I heard that the next day, Monday, she's back his wife again. So that's why he said ula olam to allude to that, to say that no, we don't want to have that type of situation to be to have any reisa on the get. But the truth is, it's going to be kosher in these situations, and therefore it's not a right that he didn't mention Vidain. It could be that you do need Vidain, he just wasn't going to mention that. Anytime,